right, so welcome to another day, another practice. I want to start with a quote that says, price is only an issue if value is absent. For a lot of us, we struggle with asking ourselves the question. A lot of times, value has to do with what others value. It has to do with this external value, social value, or the demands in our life, which is natural. Um, like growing up in the 90s, there was this thing with like, and you have it now as well, with sales and coupons. And the thing is that I noticed that a lot of people get really excited with sales. But the thing is that, and sales are really great. The only problem is that when you get into the habit of buying things, it's more of this habit that's shaped over time versus going into the place of being like, when I need something, I buy it versus um, the market kind of controls how I operate. And then what happens is our priorities kind of shift and it kind of misleads us into this space where we then are influenced more by our environment than our personality. So that's really, really important to kind of pay attention to where in our life has that been skewed. So the same concept really goes beyond like the checkout counter. And we're constantly measuring costs. And and it's the cost is always around like how we see the value. So for example, something in my own life, like I had to balance, having children and having a business. Um, you know, making money and then attending to my children's needs. Sometimes, at some point, like when we go into this like fantasy and we're younger, we're like, oh, I'll just make a lot of money and then my kids will be really happy. Like I'll be able to like compensate them financially. Um, but when we kind of dive deeper into life, we notice that the reality is that life in itself is effort. The thing that has value is our energy. And when you're younger, right, when you're a little immature and even as a child, you're like, oh my gosh, I have money, I can buy things, rather than the utility and its value. And for a lot of us nowadays, when it comes to that, it's the same kind of thing where if you ask yourself what you value, right? And money is a really great place to put that. So it's not necessarily if you can afford it or you can't afford it. It's asking yourself, what's the thing that gets you past that threshold when it comes to a sale, right? Like, what is the thing that makes you buy it? Where do you kind of tell yourself, I can do this or I can't afford this? And for most of us, when it comes to like social pressures and all of that, there's a lot of emphasis on an external. But if we take those same principles and apply them to a personal experience, um, you will kind of be able to be a little bit more mindful. So with your practices and your habits because of its value. So it's like this, it's a kind of we talk about diet a lot because that's an easy one to compare. Um, if we understand the value, right, of a good, healthy diet and the consequence of not dealing with not having good habits, then it can promote you to, it can help you and motivate you to purchase healthier things and make healthier choices. But a lot of times, one of the greatest excuses that I hear often when it comes to um, eating healthy, for example, is it costs too much. Um, when it comes to, different things, taking care of your health, taking care of your emotional well-being, it's a lot of times I hear it costs too much. So the question I would like to propose is, is a lot of times when we're looking at something that costs too much, a lot of times it's because we're following something blindly. Okay. So, like with a diet or even therapy, right? For example, when it comes to anything in the healing world, uh, we almost like, and I found this even for myself in earlier days of therapy, where I kind of almost relied on my therapist to make decisions for me versus like, I'm like, oh, I have a professional in my life. She needs to make all the decisions. And then I find myself feeling a little insecure in certain areas. And I'm like, I can't make those decisions on my own. Because as soon as some anxiety would come up, I'd be like, oh, I can't trust myself to make decisions. And there were certain things in my life that created almost like this evidence of like, you see, you're not good at making decisions. And for example, going through a divorce or hard times when it comes to business, right? So like this halo effect, and I talked about the halo effect before, where it's like this all or nothing scenario where we feel like, oh, well, if I can't make this, um if I got divorced, right? And for a while I used to like literally say this. I was like, well, I've made a bad decision in the past, so I don't trust myself in making decisions. So don't ask me my opinion because I make bad decisions. And it's something that kind of gets ingrained in our head. Um, and it kind of took me some time to like peel away from all of that and then kind of going through this cycle of this attachment to different kind of modalities, let's say when it comes to healing or all of that, that I got so attached that I realized that the attachment in itself was crippling me. And that actually, when I looked at the value, was I had zero value at that point. So when we kind of step back from life, from all the decision making and all of that, and we kind of just look at life's nature. So number one, when it comes to like spirituality, every single one of us has a journey, right? And it's not always about you making good or bad decisions. It's about your neshama and the tafkid. Like there's a process that we have to go through. So there's that part, and in my life I've learned to surrender to certain parts of that. And I learned also that the reality of life is not so much about the outcome. I was attaching so much of the value to the outcome versus attaching the value to the decision making and the effort being put in. And when I mean effort, I don't mean the hard work, but more about the alignment. So this is really, really important because, and this is something I can credit my mother for because she says, I don't look at the results. I'll just put in the effort. And what's interesting is that when you have that mindset, it's you kind of less you go less into like that child mode of like like the marshmallow experiment where you you don't need so much of that kind of verification and satisfaction in the moment, and you're able to look at the long term game versus the short term like attention and satisfaction. And when we understand that it's more about the process, it's about where we are now, it makes a huge difference. And what happens is that when we're constantly so that's one piece. Then there's the next piece, which is when we're constantly in the place of um looking looking for like saying I'm going to put in the effort and it's either I fail or I succeed and that's it, right? And if I look at myself as failure, right? Like if I say I failed in a relationship, um there's this kind of shutdown. There's so many components of us that shut down. There are so many belief systems that are built around that. And and the thing is at the end of the day, the thing that is the most detrimental which it hurts us the most, is it puts us in a place where we're not even able to enjoy life and we're not able to be receptive to the joys of life. If everything's so much about the satisfaction, it's like we go into this place of um of conditional love, right? So it's like not only do we not love others um conditionally, it's also for ourselves. It's like I can only value myself, right? And this is where the value component comes in if there is success attached to this. If I've been successful, if I like the way I look, if I like, all the other things, right? How I feel. And then when we're looking, and that's kind of where we kind of get into that tripwire of nowadays, especially with that halo effect, where it's so easy for somebody to sell us something, right? So it's so easy to go out there and get conned. And again, in business, I've gone through this con where you see people that are very successful then end up taking your money as well, um, because they're very successful, not realizing that it has what we're not looking for success. What we are looking for is somebody that has a valuable process, right? And it's about the process, a valued process. And the older I get, the more I realize that like there's an ethical component to it too. Like I could make a lot of money, right? I have a lot of women that come to me and say they don't feel they have value when they are just mothers, right? Like especially nowadays in a day and age where we can kind of manufacture a personality and we can build a business and we can do all those things and get a lot of attention or credit for it or credibility, even feel valuable, right? Like a certain sense of value or empowerment from that. Um, I ask these mothers a simple question, and you can use this in anything in your life. Um, if you decided to drop everything in your life right now, right? Walk away from your relationships with your partner, your family, your religious practices, your children. If you walked away from everything right now and focused solely on business, on it, do you believe that you would fail or do you believe that you wouldn't be successful if you go into whatever career you desire? And a lot of these women are like, no, of course, if I go into business, I know I will be successful. So then I said, okay, so it's not that you can't do it, it's that your value, what you value, has so much more value in that sense that, like, your relationships, your spiritual practice, your nefesh, right? It's not only your neshama, but your nefesh, right? Your spirit needs that contentment too. Um, your relationships with yourself, or you value the relationship you have with yourself, that you know that you need a community, right? It, like for our mental health and emotional health and spiritual health, we work in communities, right? And that is accountability to a partner and our family. And that is the equity that we create in life. Because at the end of the day, that is all we have. That is the legacy. That is what we have. That is what we build. It's that infrastructure. And in like a Western society, yes, we are building, there is a lot of wealth that's being built. But when you look at like some of the unethical practices, or even where some of these successful people fail in the sense of what really matters, and that could be their health and their real genuine happiness, and they're willing to sacrifice that for some bigger picture, it doesn't pan out. It doesn't pan out. So coming back to that question, it's like, oh, okay, my children are more important than my business. So if my business fails, right, it's okay, because at the end of the day, it's about the effort I'm putting in. And the focal point is that whatever I'm trying to do financially is supposed to support the family, because the family is before the finances. So I don't, my building a family is not for me to go to work, but going to work it helps me generate that family sustainability. So when we look at value, so when we understand our priorities first, with value, that will put some one thing into perspective. Then the second thing is looking into those ethical practices. And that's when we have like the sense of midos, of a mida is a measurement. And usually good people have good practices. Um, and a little bit goes a very long way. And that is something that I really learned. The thing is they're usually wholesome experiences. So a really great, really important thing to ask yourself is, will this thing put me at risk? So will this food put me at risk? Will this job put my relationships at risk between my partner, my parents, my children? Will this behavior put my reputation at risk? Will this investment or decision put me in harm's way? So just something overall, which is kind of like this scan, because people will say to me, like, how do I know if somebody is um, something is somebody or something is worth an investment or not? And I always say, notice if that person or that thing will put you in harm's way. So what that means is like if you have like good friends and healthy friends, I'll say good healthy friends will never prioritize themselves over you. And again, this is not a general, as in sometimes a friend will come and say, I need you to listen to me. That's fine. But if, let's say, me as a friend, I will make sure that that like, a husband walks in, a child is there, I will remove myself from that situation, understanding that I'm not going to compromise what you know what I'm saying, what you have and what you value. And a lot of times when there's unhealthy behavior or um unhealthy habits, right? Even with clients, like you might value, you say, okay, but they pay me a lot. But like, what are they putting at risk? Is it a client that will just call you at a time or ask you to do something, take it out of like your family time, right? And so when we, instead of blaming other people, so the thing is, for a lot of people, we're looking in those situations, we look for bad people. But the thing is, it has nothing to do with bad people or bad foods, right? It's not that food is bad. And we kind of went through this era of like, this is terrible and that's terrible and that's toxic. And then what you have is an arc where you can't rule anything out. Every single thing ends up being put into that category. So what happens is it that's if you're looking at it that way. But then you're on high alert all the time. You have high anxiety. You're constantly looking for where the next danger might be coming from. So instead, what we want to do is we want to peel away from that and take responsibility for ourselves. And when we create a certain sense of boundary, when we ask ourselves, like, let's say I say, I'm going to have healthy uh, work practices, for example, right? So let's say there's some contract work. Just give me 1 second. I'm still teaching, so give me 2 minutes, okay? Um, so let's say if there was contract work that came my way. Um, and the first thing I asked this person was, is there going to be more work after hours, or is the hours that you want me to work, is that going to be where the work starts and finishes? And for me right now, that was really a really important thing. Now, if somebody doesn't respect the rules I put into play, right? Obviously, there's room to negotiate, but you always want to, it's about what I need in this situation. And when we're able to kind of articulate that first, then number one, we start trusting ourselves, right? And going back to kind of that therapy thing, or we go into the place where it's not about, we're not making decisions from a place of if we succeeded or failed. We're making decisions from a progressive space where we are completely present in our space, and we're making those decisions from the here and now and saying, if we've regulated our body, right? And let's say you haven't eaten and somebody calls you or somebody needs you to do something and you're like, um I can't, you say, I haven't eaten yet. That person, again, more times than not, will say, okay, sit down and eat first. We'll talk later. Or I see you're going through something now. Whatever I need from you will wait. Right. So when we're in a place where we can create that foundation for ourselves, we will build the boundaries. And then when we communicate our boundaries, that other person, if they're in a healthy space, will respect it. And if they're not, they won't. But the thing is, then we don't pin it on that person's bad or not. It's just that our values don't align. And that makes life so much easier because we're not building negativity in our head. And that's the point of this. That then when we understand, then when we are kind of building out our radar of, or the value chart of how we measure value, it's not coming from, oh, this person's successful. Like, for example, like, somebody was saying, this nutritious coach, and I know the people that I work with and they look very healthy. Not, what I'm saying? I look and I'm like, okay, this person has good body alignment. They're sharp in their head. They're organized in their life. They communicate clearly. There's a certain accountability. Um, and I've seen nutritious coaches that are very obsessive, or even in the healing space. Like I've come across quite a few that end up being neurotic in the sense of like, um, everything's toxic and you have to get like the first thing that people will do when they meet a coach, like when it comes to health coach, is this health coach will tear them apart for the amount of toxicity in their life. And I was like, if you're a holistic health coach, you're not going to tear anybody apart. You're going to, because then you're not adding any value, right? So that in itself to me is a sign that maybe that person is not the best advisor for me. So just bringing it all together, when we are in a position where we are trying to progress our value system, the thing we want to do is take accountability for the things that we value and really taking that seriously, right? And then asking yourself how you measure them and then how much they're worth. Because at that point, you'll understand the cost, you'll understand what the price is, right? And simple thing, even when it comes to like, clothing, for example, I prefer buying one thing that is made really, really well than having an entire season worth of clothes. Um, because I like to build a wardrobe versus being on trend. And I found that, over the years, I've done some research and I've discovered the brands that I really like, also the brands I could depend on. And I work up to it. I work up to it, to buying something. So as you kind of approach life, just notice how you measure value because that will help with consistency. Then you don't get swallowed up in the machine. You start building trust within yourself. And then in our brain, we're not using our brain as a filter to filter negative of, oh, this person, that thing is bad. Rather, it's a positive and it's a progressive space where we're in a place where we're telling ourselves, okay, um, this is a healthy practice. Um, this is holding myself accountable to myself. And again, people will say, oh, you're being selfish. And it's like, no, that has nothing to do with being selfish. You can make time for other people. We all make time for other people, but it's understanding that when you're in healthy relationships, there are certain things that are prioritized and respected. So I think that's kind of the process of the day. It's this is it, I wrote this in the newsletter, the newsletter last week, and it was called A Simple But Valuable Question to Ask Yourself. So feel free to check out that newsletter as well, and I'll take questions if anyone has any.